The Galactic Coalition's Grand Council chamber was filled with a tense silence. The usually grand and imposing room now seemed to carry the weight of impending defeat. Admiral Kovacs, his skin paler than usual, stood before a laser plasma display, staring at the marked territories. His forearms rested on the table, knuckles white from gripping it too tightly. The red marks on the display were unmistakable. Planets lost to the Vorax. It had become a grim routine. Systems falling, one by one. "We've lost another 3 systems this week," Kovacs stated, his voice low, almost mechanical, as he glanced up to face the representatives gathered around the table. His words hung heavy in the air. The truth was undeniable. "The Vorax advance faster than we can evacuate our people." He let the silence linger, hoping for some miracle, though none was forthcoming. The room felt colder now, a metaphor for the dread that had settled within the council. A decade of war, endless battles with no decisive victory, and the coalition's forces, once the mightiest in the galaxy, were now on the verge of collapse. Many of the 17 species that formed the coalition couldn't even look the Admiral in the eye. They were afraid, some of them defeated. General Tazal of the Morgasi, his form covered in shimmering, scale-like armor, raised a clawed hand, his voice trembling with frustration. "At this rate, we have perhaps 1 standard year before our core worlds are directly threatened," he declared, his voice thick with the burden of their shared hopelessness. He pointed to the sectors in red on the display, which seemed to grow more numerous with each passing day. "We have superior technology," Minister Yolena spoke up, her crystalline form flickering under the dim light of the room. She was one of the coalition's more vocal proponents of technological reliance. "Our ships are faster, our weapons more advanced than theirs. Why do we continue to lose?" Kavak's gaze turned back to the display, a haunting reflection of a losing war. "The Vorax adapt too quickly. They sacrifice thousands to learn our tactics and then counter them perfectly." The walls seemed to close in on them as he spoke. Holographic images of the Vorax appeared on the display, showing their hideous insectoid forms, armored exoskeletons, limbs tipped with razor-sharp claws, and a mindless, hive-driven efficiency. Their relentless assault on coalition systems was becoming too much to bear. Science Director Helan, a small and furry being from the Pellerin system, added, "They have consumed all organic matter on 37 worlds now. There is nothing left but barren rock." He paused, his voice barely above a whisper. "They strip planets completely before moving to the next." As the words settled over the room, the atmosphere grew even colder, as if the mere thought of extinction was enough to freeze the very air around them. The silence that followed was deafening, each member of the council contemplating the unthinkable. Extinction by the hands of a mindless, relentless enemy. "Then why are we still here?" General Tazal growled, exasperation lacing his words. "If they win, it won't just mean defeat, it will mean the end of all of us. There has to be another way." Dr. Zellner, the quiet scientist who had been sitting at the end of the table, finally spoke. His voice was soft, but steady. "Perhaps there is another option," he said, his eyes glimmering with a quiet certainty. All eyes turned to him, as if searching for something, anything, that might offer hope. "Explain," Admiral Kovacs ordered, his voice a bit sharper than usual. Dr. Zellner stood, the aging scientist's hands steady despite the tension in the room. He reached forward and pressed a button on his console. A new image filled the laser plasma display, a small blue-green planet surrounded by an unremarkable solar system. "The humans," he said, with a small, almost imperceptible smile, "come from this planet. They call it Earth." The image on the display zoomed in, showing an image of Earth's sprawling continents and vast oceans. A murmur of confusion spread across the room. "Earth?" General Tazal questioned. "This primitive planet? How does this help us?" Dr. Zellner remained calm, pressing forward. "They may seem primitive by our standards, but Earth has something we do not." He tapped the screen, highlighting historical images. "This species has spent its entire history engaged in endless wars, Thousands of years of conflict, driven by strategic thinking, guerrilla tactics, and psychological warfare, concepts we left behind centuries ago. Minister Elena scoffed. And you want us to request help from them? What could they possibly offer? Dr. Zellmer's eyes never wavered. Their technology is far behind ours, yes. But their experience in warfare, their understanding of chaos, of unpredictability, is what we need. We've forgotten what it means to fight without order, without calculation. But the humans, they have never forgotten. Admiral Kovex's expression darkened as he absorbed Dr. Zellner's words. His fingers drummed on the edge of the table. So you suggest we ask these primitives to fight our war for us? We have technology that dwarfs theirs. What difference could their tactics make? A different way of thinking, Dr. Zellner replied, his tone firm. Our strategies have become predictable, but humans understand war in a way we have lost. Their methods, they are born from chaos and the need to survive. They do not play by the same rules. A long silence followed. What harm could come from exploring this strange option? Admiral Kovex finally said. His voice was weary but edged with a hint of desperation. Prepare a diplomatic vessel. I will leave the mission myself. The decision was made, but not without hesitation. The council members were wary. Some saw it as a last resort. Others saw it as a fool's errand. The skeptical murmurs were drowned out by the weight of the situation. The coalition's strength was slipping away, and they had little left to lose. On Earth, the news of an alien diplomatic mission spread quickly. At first, it seemed like a strange hoax, but when the massive alien ship appeared in the sky over New York City, it became clear that humanity had been chosen to help. As Admiral Kovex and his delegation landed in Earth skies, human military officials prepared to meet them. Colonel Jack Harmon stood at attention alongside the Secretary General of the United Nations. At 52, Harmon had served in wars across 3 continents and was battle-hardened, the scars of combat evident on his weathered face. He had faced insurmountable odds before, but this was different. The stakes were far higher now. Remember, the Secretary General said quietly, you're here because you understand war better than anyone. Listen to what they have to say. Admiral Kovex led the alien group, his blue skin and forearms making him stand out among the humans. Behind him were other representatives from the coalition's various species, some humanoid, others resembling creatures from Earth's wildest dreams. We come in peace, Kovex said, his voice calm but tinged with an undertone of urgency. We seek your help. The silence that followed the decision was suffocating. Admiral Kovex's eyes scanned the room, his mind racing as the chamber doors closed behind him. The council had approved it, albeit reluctantly. But the terms were clear. No human soldiers in the field. Not yet. The diplomatic mission was just a formality. The humans were to be advisors, not combatants. It wasn't just the skepticism that clouded the coalition's view of humanity. It was their history, their unpredictable nature. Humans were to be kept at arm's length until the war's tides had shifted, and even then, only as a last resort. Kovex turned toward the human delegation which had just arrived from Earth. The gravity of the moment hit him. These were not the warriors of a developed civilization. They were relics, their strategies crude and unpredictable. He couldn't suppress a scoff at the idea that they might be the key to victory. Colonel Jack Harmon, the leader of the human delegation, stepped forward. His face was stern, battle-hardened from years of warfare. He surveyed the room with eyes that had seen too much. His features, worn and scarred, revealed nothing of the intensity that burned within him. At 52, Jack had led troops across multiple continents. He'd spent more time on the battlefield than he had at home. The years of constant combat had left their mark. Not just on his face, but on his psyche as well. He was used to the weight of command, to the quiet moments before a storm. But this was different. Admiral Kovex, General Tazal, Jack said, his voice even but laced with the weight of a man who had seen too many failures. You wanted us. Now we're here. Let's get to work. The alien representative stared at him, their eyes wide with both curiosity and suspicion. General Tazol's reptilian eyes narrowed, his body language conveying an unspoken challenge. Your people have been fighting wars for millennia. You don't even have the technology to match ours. Why do you believe your tactics could make a difference here? Jack's gaze remained steady. Because we understand war in ways you don't. You rely on technology. We rely on creativity. We think when it's not convenient, and we fight when the rules say we shouldn't. Minister Yelena, her crystalline form gleaming under the soft lighting, stepped forward. What is it you think we lack? We have faster ships, more advanced weapons. What use would your outdated tactics serve? Jack didn't flinch. You may have the best technology, but you fight with a playbook. And the Vorax, they don't follow the rules. His tone sharpened. We've seen it before. We've fought enemies who learn our tactics, adapt, and use them against us. That's why we're here. Admiral Curvex's voice interrupted. You claim to have something we don't. I need to see it for myself, and I need to be convinced. Jack nodded, his expression resolute. Give us the chance, and we'll show you. He turned to the human soldiers behind him. Their eyes were fixed, alert, but their nerves were still evident. These soldiers were not rookies. They had seen combat, and they were here for the same reason Jack was. Because Earth needed to help, whether the Coalition liked it or not. Tension filled the room as Jack's words lingered. The Coalition leaders exchanged glances, silently weighing the gravity of the situation. General Tazol was the first to speak, his voice thick with skepticism. I'll be blunt with you, Colonel. You're nothing more than a primitive species. How can you even begin to match an enemy as sophisticated as the Vorax? Jack leaned forward, locking eyes with Tazol. Because we fight like we have nothing to lose. We don't care about honor or rules or being pretty. We fight to survive, to adapt. And if the Vorax want to learn, we'll teach them, not through technology, but through chaos. The room went quiet again, the weight of Jack's words sinking in. Dr. Zellner, who had been standing off to the side, observing the exchange, cleared his throat. What we need from you is simple, he said. Your tactics. We've been stuck in the same patterns for too long. It's time to break the cycle. We need your experience in guerrilla warfare, in fighting outside the box. Admiral Curvex leaned back in his chair, his gaze never leaving Jack. I am willing to give you a chance, but if your methods fail, the Coalition will bear the cost. You will remain advisors, nothing more. Jack's lips twitched upward, but the smile was grim. You'll get what you need. We don't fail. Not when there's no other option. The negotiation, while tense, had reached its conclusion. It was clear now that the human involvement would be far from straightforward. The Coalition would not simply welcome their help. They would fight for it, every step of the way. Later that day, Jack found himself alone in his quarters, sitting at the small desk while reviewing the reports that had been forwarded from Earth. The room felt cold, sterile, alien, even though it was meant to be a temporary home. Outside, the stars of the Andoria system twinkled through the window, but Jack couldn't focus on their beauty. His thoughts were elsewhere. He thought of Earth, of his people, his home. He thought of the wars that had shaped him, shaped humanity. He thought of how each battle had forged a new way of thinking, a new understanding of survival. That was what he'd learned the hard way. There was always another way to fight, always another way to win. But would the Coalition understand that? Would they accept the chaos that came with unpredictability, the sacrifice of order for something much messier? His thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. Jack stood, moving quickly as the door opened to reveal Lisa Rice, one of the senior strategists on his team. Colonel, she said, her voice low but steady. We're ready to begin the briefing with Admiral Curvex. They want to hear our plan. Jack nodded, his face hardening as he turned toward her. Let's show them what we've got. As they made their way to the meeting room, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the cusp of something monumental. Whether it would be their salvation or their undoing was still uncertain. But one thing was clear: humanity's involvement in the war had just begun. And if the coalition was going to survive, they would have to learn to fight like humans. "Move faster, I want the barrel in your hands, not just in front of you." Colonel Jack Harmon's voice cut through the air as his soldiers lined up, preparing for their next training drill. His eyes narrowed as he watched the human and alien soldiers alike scramble to position themselves under the heat of his demanding gaze. The laser plasma displays behind him flickered, showing maps and tactics for the simulated battle that was about to begin. The display showed the coalition's weak spots, the areas where they had been slaughtered by the Vorax, and Jack couldn't help but feel the weight of the failure hanging over them. "Now, spread out," Jack commanded, his fingers pointing toward the farthest points of the training area. "Use the terrain. Use cover. You're not here to stand and fight. Move, adapt, and hit when they least expect it." "Sir, this isn't how we fight," said a coalition officer, his voice thick with resistance. He stood rigidly, arms crossed, staring at the assembled human soldiers. "Our training is based on formations, not this. Scattered chaos." Jack didn't flinch. He'd heard it all before. That's the problem. The Vorax don't fight like a military force. They're a single organism, a mind that adapts instantly. If we keep using the same tactics, they'll counter us every time. "Your methods are inefficient," General Tezel chimed in from the side, his long, scaled fingers tapping impatiently against his arm. "The Vorax will overwhelm us before your unpredictability gets anywhere." "Unpredictability isn't an option," Jack replied, his tone steely. "It's a necessity. We fight like we're already dead. That's the only way to win against something that adapts as fast as the Vorax." He shot a look at the alien officers standing behind him. "And I'll show you why." He turned to the soldiers, his voice booming across the training ground. "We're not going to march in lines. We're not going to wait for orders. This is guerrilla warfare, a hit-and-run strategy. Get in, strike fast, and disappear before they can even react." For a moment, there was silence. The humans, the seasoned soldiers, exchanged looks of understanding. The alien soldiers, however, stood motionless, confused by the chaos they were being asked to embrace. "Ready, Jack." A voice from the ranks broke the silence. It was Frank Martinez, his voice calm, his eyes scanning the environment with a predator's focus. "Good, go," Jack snapped. The soldiers erupted into motion, their feet pounding the earth as they dispersed in all directions. The simulations began, and the air was soon filled with the sounds of rapid movement, laser fire, and the distant echoes of conflict. General Tezel's expression remained skeptical as he observed the chaos unfolding. "You call this an improvement?" he grumbled. "It looks like disarray." "It is," Jack said, his voice low but with an undeniable edge of satisfaction. "But it's controlled disarray. We control the chaos and the enemy can't adapt." The display behind Jack shifted, showing the alien soldiers' confusion and failure to adapt to the human strategy. They moved in tight formations, instinctively following their training. They didn't understand how to think on their feet. They couldn't grasp the ebb and flow of human unpredictability. As Jack watched, he allowed himself a moment to reflect. His soldiers were pushing themselves to the limit. They'd been trained for this, not just for combat, but for the mental game that came with it. Tactics had to be a fluid thing, always changing, always adapting. There was no room for rigidity. A voice broke through his thoughts. It was Admiral Kervex, watching the simulation from the sidelines. "Colonel, the tactics you're teaching are unconventional?" "Unconventional?" Jack said, his gaze narrowing. "You think these methods are odd because they're not like yours. But yours aren't working. Your tactics are rigid. The Vorax will eat you alive if you don't change the way you fight." The Admiral said nothing, but the flicker of doubt in his eyes was enough. For the first time since the humans had arrived, he seemed to truly understand what Jack was saying. The Vorax had taken the Coalition's superior technology and turned it against them. What the Coalition needed now was not just weapons, but strategy. Something humans had in abundance. It was a realization that stung. General Tezel stepped forward, his body language stiff, betraying a deep-seated frustration. "Your methods are wasteful. They'll only slow us down. We're not playing a game of hide-and-seek with the enemy. They're not just enemies, General. They're a puzzle, Jack said, walking slowly toward him. The trick is to make them doubt their own patterns. If you stop them from predicting your next move, they lose their advantage. Behind them, the alien officers watched, still skeptical but beginning to see the merit in Jack's words. They couldn't deny that the tactics were different, but there was something raw and effective in the chaos that the humans embraced. They'd seen the Coalition's top strategies fail against the Vorax. Maybe it was time for a change. Suddenly the simulation shifted, and the training ground erupted with a new wave of attacks. The human soldiers responded instantly, slipping into their guerrilla tactics, vanishing and reappearing, confusing the alien soldiers with every move. The simulations grew chaotic. A laser plasma display flashed above them, showing the tactical map of the battlefield. Frank's team was setting ambushes, using the environment to their advantage, hitting from angles the Coalition had never considered. The Vorax had no time to react, no time to adapt. The human method was working. Impressive, Kerbeck said, his voice betraying some measure of respect. The results speak for themselves. Jack allowed himself a brief nod. It's just the beginning. But you'll see. When it's time to fight, you'll wish you'd started training this way from the start. The drill ended and the soldiers gathered once more. Sweat dripped from their brows, their clothes were stained, and their faces showed exhaustion. But they weren't done yet, not even close. As Jack walked to the command tent, his mind was already on the next phase. They'd proven something today. Proved that even in the face of overwhelming odds, humanity could adapt and fight smarter, not harder. But it wasn't enough yet. General Tazelhall's voice rang out as he approached. "Colonel," he said, his voice soft but determined. "You may be right. We've been trying to outfight the Vorax, but maybe we need to outthink them." Jack didn't respond immediately, but the corner of his mouth twitched into a faint, knowing smile. The seeds had been planted. Now it was a matter of waiting for the storm to break, and when it did, the Vorax wouldn't know what hit them. "We're moving in. Stay sharp. No mistakes." Colonel Jack Harmon's voice rang through the communication channels, his tone steady despite the adrenaline pumping in his veins. His team of human soldiers moved swiftly, shadows blending into the rocky terrain, weapons held low and eyes scanning every inch of the environment. They were outnumbered, but that had never stopped them before. The laser plasma displays on their wrist pads flickered, mapping out the Vorax outpost just ahead. 2 buildings, reinforced walls, and a scattering of enemy drones. 5 minutes to engagement, Major Steve Gordon reported, his voice gravelly as he kept his eyes on the approaching outpost. Behind him, the alien soldiers, still struggling to adapt to the unpredictability of human tactics, moved in formation. But their uncertainty was palpable. They didn't yet understand the value of chaos. That was Jack's job, to show them. "We know their patterns. We'll hit them fast, hard, and then vanish before they can react," Jack continued, never breaking stride. "Remember, no direct assault. Disrupt, confuse, and make them chase shadows." The first laser plasma bursts from the enemy hit the rocks just ahead of them, splintering stone and sending dust into the air. It was the first sign that the Vorax had seen them, but it was too late. The human force had already scattered, using the debris field for cover, fading into the background like ghosts. "Initiate Phase 1, Jack said into his earpiece. Within seconds, the alien soldiers, those brave enough to follow Jack's orders, deployed a small diversionary tactic. They fired their weapons in synchronized bursts, drawing the Vorax away from the real threat. Jack's team had already moved behind the outpost's perimeter, planting explosives along the base of the structure. There were no grand gestures, no overwhelming firepower, only careful, tactical strikes meant to sow confusion. "Phase 2, initiate now," Jack ordered, and the world around them erupted into chaos. The blast from the explosives sent a shockwave through the outpost, causing the Vorax defenses to fracture. Alien drones, already scattered from the earlier attack, scrambled for cohesion, but it was too late. The humans had made their move. As the smoke from the explosion cleared, Jack's team flanked the remaining enemies, cutting off their retreat. The Vorax reacted instinctively, falling into their hive mind coordination, but the humans were already gone, slipping between shadows and striking with precision at weak points. General Tazzle, watching from the distant command center, clenched his fist, his expression unreadable. The first wave of attacks had been executed flawlessly, but the real test was coming. The Vorax were beginning to adapt. "I see the value in their approach, but this won't be enough," General Tazzle muttered under his breath as he watched the live feed from the laser plasma displays. He could already see the Vorax moving into formation, trying to recalibrate their strategy. They were quick learners, and their adaptation could shift the balance. Admiral Kervek, standing beside him, nodded slowly. "We'll see how they fare against a full retaliation." Back on the ground, Jack's team continued their assault, striking quickly and relentlessly. "Move out, team. Stick to the plan," Jack barked as he crouched behind cover, watching a Vorax drone approach their position. His hand reached for his sidearm as the drone advanced, but before he could act, Frank Martinez's voice came over the comms. "On your 6, Colonel." Frank, with his usual calm demeanor, was already in position, picking off the enemy from an elevated position with surgical precision. Jack gave a slight nod of approval. They worked like a well-oiled machine now. Every member of his team, human and alien alike, moving in perfect synchronicity. "Let's wrap this up," Jack ordered. He moved forward, leading his team into the heart of the outpost. It wasn't a large victory, not yet, but it was a start, a proof that unpredictability, that chaotic nature humans could bring, could destabilize even the most adaptive enemies. Operation complete. Frank's voice was sharp as he rejoined Jack and the others. The outpost was in ruins, and the Vorax were scattered, their hive mind thrown into disarray. "No casualties, minimal resistance." Admiral Kervex's voice crackled over the comms, a rare hint of respect in his tone. "Colonel Harmon, you've done it. The first real victory we've had in over 6 months. Congratulations." Jack allowed himself a small smirk, but said nothing. His soldiers, his people, had done what they always did. They had won through adaptability, through ingenuity. Not by overwhelming force, but by making the enemy unsure, uncertain, and unable to predict their next move. General Tazzle's face hardened. "This does not change the fact that we need a more efficient approach," he said, though there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes. "You're right," Jack said coolly as he surveyed the devastation around him. "The next phase will prove if these tactics can truly break the Vorax. If they can't adapt to us, we will win. If they do, then we'll change the game again." Kervek stepped closer to the display as Jack's words lingered in the air. "General, Minister Yolina, I think it's time we reconsidered how we approach this war." Tension simmered in the command center as the full weight of the victory set in. The coalition, long accustomed to relying on their advanced technology, was beginning to understand that perhaps their reliance on precision and strength had blinded them to something more important. Adaptability. Jack turned back to his soldiers. They were still moving, still preparing for the next phase, but for the first time since they had arrived, he could see that the tide was beginning to shift. The coalition was listening now, their skepticism slowly starting to melt away. "We've proven that we can do this," Jack muttered under his breath, more to himself than anyone else. And as he watched the coalition leaders digest the implications of their victory, he couldn't help but feel the tiniest spark of hope. It wasn't much yet, but it was enough to keep pushing forward. The war had only just begun, but humanity had already shown that they were not just capable of surviving, they were capable of winning. General Tazzle looked up from the display. "We must proceed with caution, Kervex. We cannot afford to let them—" Kervex raised a hand, silencing the general. "I'll have a meeting scheduled with the council immediately. We will discuss our next steps. But for now, we allow the humans their victory." Jack turned and started walking toward the edge of the battlefield, his mind already working on the next steps. They hadn't won the war yet, but today had been a start. Today they had made a statement. and that was something the Vorax would have to deal with. Change of plans. They've adapted faster than we anticipated, Jack said into his communicator, his voice tight with frustration. The battle reports flashed on his heads-up display, outlining the brutal efficiency of the Vorax response. They had quickly adjusted to the hit-and-run tactics the humans had used to cripple their defenses. The Vorax were learning, and the Coalition was struggling to keep up. The laser plasma screens in the command center buzzed with images of the latest engagement. Entire swaths of the human forces had been outmaneuvered, their ambushes countered with unnerving precision. The Vorax, once caught off guard, were now shifting their strategies, breaking into smaller, harder-to-track units and employing slow, lumbering hive mind. They were no longer the slow, lumbering hive mind. They had evolved. "They're using our tactics against us," Colonel Frank Martinez muttered, watching as a squad of Vorax soldiers split into 3 groups, each outflanking the human position. "Damn it. We've got to stay ahead of them. They're learning faster than we are," Major Steve Gordon said, shaking his head. "At this rate, we're outmatched." Jack's brow furrowed. He had seen this coming. The Vorax were relentless in their pursuit of efficiency, and now that they had adopted a portion of human tactics, their ability to counter the guerrilla strategy was growing exponentially. The next move was on him. He was going to have to escalate. "We need to change the game," Jack said, turning to Lisa Rice, who was observing the same data, her expression unreadable. "I agree," Lisa replied, her voice steady. "We need something more than just tactics. We need to get into their heads." Jack nodded. "Psychological warfare. Misinformation, confusion, traps. We'll keep them guessing. If they can't predict us, they'll be too scattered to fight efficiently." Lisa's eyes gleamed. "Risky, but it's our best shot." In the war room, the discussion had become tense. General Tazol and Minister Yolina, who had previously been skeptical of human strategies, now found themselves grappling with the rapidly escalating situation. The humans had proven their worth in battle, but the harsh reality of war was setting in. The loss of more outposts to the Vorax had forced a drastic reevaluation of the Coalition's approach. Some, like General Tazol, still insisted on relying on technological superiority and the established military doctrines. "Human tactics are effective but not sustainable," Tazol argued, his voice sharp. "We can't rely on this unpredictability forever. It's inefficient." Minister Yolina, always one to value logic over emotion, adjusted her crystalline form and said, "I understand your reservations, General, but we have seen real results. Maybe it's time to consider integrating these tactics on a larger scale." Admiral Curvex, who had once been the most vocal opponent to the humans, now stood quietly, deep in thought. He looked at the laser plasma displays, where the fragmented battlefield reports continued to pour in. It was clear. The Vorax were winning, at least for now. The tactical advantage that humans had brought to the table was slowly slipping away as the Vorax adapted at a pace that was unprecedented. "We need to rethink how we engage them," Curvex said finally, breaking the silence. "If they can adapt this quickly, we must do the same." Jack stood across from the Admiral, his gaze unwavering. "We have to push them to a point where they can't keep up. We don't just need to be unpredictable. We need to be impossible to predict." "That's what they said about the Vorax," General Tazol grumbled. But even he couldn't deny the truth in Jack's words. The Coalition's standardized approach was not enough. It was time for a new kind of warfare. Over the next few days, Jack and Lisa spearheaded the development of new strategies. They designed a series of false signals to be broadcast across the battlefield, luring the Vorax into believing that certain Coalition units were retreating or preparing to attack in different locations. They fed the Vorax misinformation, using the same channels they had once relied on for communication, to send out deliberate, contradictory messages. "Now we're going to make them question every decision they make," Jack muttered as he reviewed the final strategy with his team. "We can't let them get comfortable. If they think they know what's coming next, they'll be ready for it." But there was a cost. As the war dragged on, more of the Coalition's forces were thrown into these deceptions, pushing their resources to the limit. The alien species within the Coalition, once confident in their technological advantage, were beginning to grow weary of the human methods. They were accustomed to battles with clear objectives, where each move was calculated and precise. The human tactics were foreign to them, chaotic, confusing, and deeply unsettling. "Have we gone too far?" Major Gordon asked, his voice a quiet undercurrent to the tension in the room. "If the Vorax adapt to our own confusion tactics, what then?" "It's a calculated risk," Jack answered, but even he wasn't sure. The tension in his gut told him that they were walking a thin line, but it was the only line they had. Meanwhile, the Coalition's council room became a battleground of its own. Some members, like Curvex, began to argue for a deeper integration of human tactics into their doctrines. The skeptics, led by Tazal and Yolana, fought hard to preserve the more traditional approaches, fearing that deviating too far from established practices would weaken the Coalition's standing. "If we keep pursuing these human strategies, we'll lose everything we've built," Tazal insisted, his voice thick with suspicion. "Our military's about control and discipline. They're asking us to abandon that for chaos." "You've seen the results," Lisa countered. "What we're asking for is adaptation, the same thing the Vorax are doing." But even as the debate raged on, the Vorax continued to advance. Less predictable than before, but still dangerous. Jack's gaze turned toward the laser plasma displays, where new reports flashed in front of him. The alien forces were beginning to turn the tide again, and the fear that had gripped him at the start of the war began to creep back into his thoughts. "We need a decisive victory," Jack said softly, more to himself than to anyone else in the room. "One victory that will make the rest of them understand." The next battle would be their proving ground, a test of everything they had done so far. Could the humans truly change the course of the war, or would the Vorax's relentless adaptability finally break them? The next phase of the war was coming, and it would be nothing like anything the Coalition had seen before. In the cold silence that followed, the uncertainty was unbearable. The war was now a game of strategy, but the cost of every move was becoming higher by the day. The humans had given the Coalition a taste of something different, but would it be enough to overcome the Vorax's evolutionary speed? The answer would soon be found. "Deploy now," Frank Martinez ordered, his voice cold despite the rising urgency. The team was cloaked in shadows, their movements synchronized like clockwork as they navigated the dim corridors of the Vorax command complex. The laser plasma displays projected a map of the layout, their paths illuminated in sharp, deliberate lines. They were close, too close, but they had to proceed. The mission was critical, and failure wasn't an option, not this time. The plan had seemed flawless: infiltrate, gather intelligence, and leave undetected. Frank had executed hundreds of similar operations during his years in Earth Special Forces, and yet this mission felt different. It wasn't just about gathering intel. It was about survival. They had to know how the Vorax were adapting. If they could get to the heart of the hive, maybe they could strike at its core. The doors to the command center slid open with a hiss, and Frank motioned for his team to enter. They quickly spread out, using the environment to their advantage, slipping behind consoles and laser plasma readouts. But the moment they crossed into the control room, Frank knew something had gone wrong. The atmosphere felt wrong. Too quiet. Then the alarms blared. "Abort! Get out of there!" Frank shouted, but it was already too late. The Vorax had anticipated their move, and within seconds the command center was swarming with soldiers. Frank's heart raced as he grabbed the nearest plasma rifle, firing with precision, but the Vorax were quick. Too quick. "They've adapted," shouted Sergeant Wilson, ducking behind a console as plasma fire ricocheted off the walls. "Fall back," Frank ordered, pulling Wilson to his feet, but the door was already sealed shut. They were trapped. The firefight felt endless, each moment slipping further out of their control. One by one, Frank's team fell back, pushing forward only to be overwhelmed by the sheer speed of the Vorax. Frank could feel the weight of each loss. This was a mission that should have succeeded, a victory they needed to secure. But now, the price of failure was becoming all too clear. After what felt like an eternity, Frank's team managed to retreat, but not without loss. He stood among the wreckage, his breathing heavy, his heart a hollow drum in his chest. The mission was a failure, plain and simple. His mind raced through the events. What went wrong? They were supposed to be unpredictable. Why had the Vorax been able to adapt so swiftly? He didn't have time to dwell on it. As they boarded their shuttle, Frank's thoughts were consumed by a single question. How were they going to keep up? How were they going to win against a species that could learn faster than they could strike? Back at the Coalition's war room, Frank's arrival was met with silence. The faces of the leadership, Curvex, Tazzle, Yolina, were grim as the reports came in. Frank's face remained expressionless as the full scope of their failure settled in. He could feel the weight of the Coalition's expectations and the bitter sting of his own disappointment. "We underestimated them," Frank said, his voice thick with frustration. "We failed to account for their ability to evolve," Lisa Rice said, her words softer than Frank's, but still cutting through the tension in the room. "But this isn't over. We need to learn from this." Curvex spoke next, his voice colder than usual. "This setback could mean the difference between victory and defeat. Our forces are already stretched thin. We need better intelligence, and fast." Frank nodded. "I'll go over the mission logs. We'll need a new approach." For hours, Frank and Lisa pored over the data. It was clear that the Vorax had begun to understand the human methods. They were adapting. Faster than expected. What had once been a weapon of unpredictability was now an open book for the Vorax to read. Their tactics were no longer enough. "We need more," Jack said, finally breaking the silence. "We need to feed them disinformation. If we can confuse them, mislead them, make them question every move they make, it could be enough to turn the tide." Frank's mind raced. Misinformation. It was a risky move, but it might just be the edge they needed. The Vorax were predictable in their reliance on coordination. What if the humans could create an environment where nothing made sense, where every step the Vorax took felt like a misstep? "I'll start laying the groundwork," Lisa said. "It won't be easy, but we can do this." The next few days were a blur of planning. Frank worked with the Coalition's tech teams, setting up fake communications, false movement reports, and bogus intelligence. They scattered false plans across the front lines, hoping the Vorax would bite. The deception wasn't perfect, but it was the best shot they had. Frank felt the weight of the mission pressing down on him. If they failed again, it might be the last chance they got to turn the war in their favor. The Coalition had already lost so much, both in terms of resources and morale. At first, it seemed like the Vorax were taking the bait. Small units began to shift position in response to the false information. For a brief moment, there was a sense of hope. But then, something changed. The Vorax were learning faster. They adapted to the misinformation, correcting their course with alarming speed. It wasn't enough. "They're too smart for this," Frank muttered. "They're catching on." Curvex watched the updates on the laser plasma displays, his expression darkening. "We've underestimated them again. What now?" Jack, ever the strategist, stepped forward. "We go deeper. We use confusion. We make them fight themselves. We plant misinformation that leads them in circles, that contradicts their own orders. They can't track everything at once." Frank's mind whirled. Jack was right. The only way forward was to go beyond deception. They needed to play the Vorax's own intelligence against them. But it would require a level of risk and creativity that the Coalition had never entertained before. Jack was already making plans, his confidence unwavering despite the failure of the previous mission. Frank felt a flicker of hope, but also the deep fatigue of knowing that the next steps in this war could either break them or finally tip the scales in their favor. The next strike would not just be another battle. It would be a war of minds. If they could outthink the Vorax, the war could still be won. But if they didn't, the cost of failure would be too great to fathom. Tensions ran high as the Coalition gathered to discuss their next move. General Tazzle was still unconvinced by the human methods, but there were now murmurs of support from others, including Curvex. "We've lost too much to hold back now," Frank said quietly. the weight of the moment heavy on him. It's time to double down on this strategy. But in the back of his mind, Frank knew that there was no turning back now. The war had taken too much already, and the human forces were running out of time. The next moves would decide everything. The coalition's final offensive was underway. The air inside the war room was thick with tension, the soft clinking of equipment blending with the rhythmic hum of laser plasma displays that flickered across the walls. The heads-up displays showed the vast swaths of the galaxy, lines of red that marked Vorax-controlled space, and the sudden expansion of coalition forces as the plan began to take shape. Frank Martinez stood alongside Jack and Lisa, watching the schematics evolve, analyzing each move, and mentally preparing for what was to come. "We've come a long way," Frank muttered, his eyes focused on the massive battlefield maps. "But this won't be easy." Jack, ever the tactician, was already scanning the various feeds, calculating. This is it. All or nothing now. No more time for missteps. Lisa looked from one to the other. "If we're going to do this, it has to be flawless. Our first move has to convince them we're attacking from every direction, confuse them, leave no clear trail." The room was filled with the low murmur of coalition officers, their faces tense, yet there was a spark of something new. A belief in the humans who had taught them how to fight without predictability, to mask their next moves. Jack's methods had worked. He wasn't just leading, they were following now, adapting to his style, understanding that the only way to beat the Vorax was to outthink them at every turn. Lisa was already preparing her team. The strategy is set. Misdirection, false movements, and real chaos. We're hitting them where they least expect it, pulling their forces into positions they can't control. This is our final play, no turning back. The battle wasn't going to be won with sheer force alone. The Vorax, a species that thrived on coordination, were now facing a force that thrived on confusion. Human tactics had upended their entire system, and now it was time to push that advantage to its breaking point. Frank took a deep breath and turned to Lisa. "You ready?" "As ready as we'll ever be," she replied, her gaze steely, focused. Jack nodded. "We're hitting the heart of their defenses. This isn't just another skirmish. We have to take everything we've learned and push it beyond what they expect. You keep your teams tight, adaptable. If they catch us, it's over." Lisa raised her fist, signaling the team to prepare. "Let's move. They won't know what hit them." The strike team left the war room in a silent march, each step heavier than the last. The shuttle ride to the Vorax's core systems was almost surreal. They had come so far, only to face the largest, most dangerous offensive yet. Every maneuver they had ever executed, every tactic they had ever used, was a rehearsal for this moment. Frank was silent, his mind running over the plan again and again. The objective was simple: infiltrate, create chaos, and destroy the Vorax's key command structure. Yet nothing about this mission felt simple. With every passing moment, the weight of the mission felt like a leaden weight pushing down on him. The first attack hit without warning. Frank's team launched from the shuttle and into the thick of the chaos. They moved quickly, cutting through the silence with precise, tactical bursts of fire. The Vorax had adapted, again. Their numbers had swelled since the last confrontation, their formations no longer predictable. But what they didn't have was the unpredictable chaos of human warfare. Frank moved through the battlefield like a shadow, his rifle silent as he took down Vorax drones in swift, calculated movements. Jack and Lisa were at the forefront, leading their squads through the shifting tides of combat. There was no one way to fight. The battle wasn't about strength. It was about adaptability, finding new ways to make the enemy question every move they made. The laser plasma displays around them began to light up, signaling the increased movement of enemy forces. The Vorax had realized they were being baited. They attempted to regroup, trying to form countermeasures. But it was too late. The disarray had already spread. The humans were where the Vorax thought they would be, and then they weren't. Misdirection had worked, and now it was up to each human team to continue that chaos. "Stay sharp," Frank yelled into his comm, watching as the Vorax attempted to make coordinated responses to their sudden onslaught. They're learning quickly. Don't give them a pattern to track. Each move was deliberate. Frank could feel his pulse quickening with every success, every breach. But his mind couldn't shake the looming realization. Victory, if it came, would be at a steep cost. It always was. The coalition forces, now fighting in full force, were beginning to feel the strain of the battle. Their numbers had swelled, but so had their vulnerability. The Vorax were far more resourceful than anyone had initially realized, and every move the humans made, every gambit, was met with a shifting countermeasure. The whole thing felt like a chess game, with each piece being pushed and shoved into place by hands the coalition didn't understand. Frank's team reached the heart of the Vorax command center. Their objective was clear: infiltrate and destroy. But there was no easy way to do it. The Vorax had anticipated the move. The trap had been set, but the enemy had already adjusted. And then, in the middle of the chaos, an explosion shook the structure. Frank was thrown to the ground, his vision spinning. "Get up!" Jack shouted, pulling Frank to his feet. The explosion had breached the walls, and the chaos that followed was instant. The Vorax had launched a full-scale counterattack, throwing everything they had at the human forces. Frank didn't hesitate. They had to move, and they had to move now. "We're close," Frank shouted, rallying his troops. "We finished this here. We can't let them adapt again." Lisa was already setting charges on a key conduit, her fingers quick and sure. "This is it. We're breaking their will." The final moments of the battle were nothing but chaos. Frank, Lisa, Jack, every soldier on the ground was engaged in a desperate struggle. But as the dust settled, one thing was clear. The Vorax had failed to adapt in time. The humans had once again outthought them. Their unpredictability had shattered the Vorax will. Back in the war room, Admiral Curvex watched the final tally of the battle unfold on his laser plasma displays. The war was far from over, but for the first time in months, there was a glimmer of hope. The Vorax had been dealt a blow they couldn't recover from. "It's done," Frank said quietly, watching as the last of the Vorax forces retreated. Jack turned to him, a grim smile playing at the edges of his lips. "No, this is just the beginning." The victory was bittersweet. There were more battles ahead. But for now, the coalition had tasted what human tactics could do. And, for the first time, they knew the true meaning of unpredictability in warfare. The humans had not only won a battle, they had begun to change the tide of the war. The final push had succeeded. The end was still far off, but the first real crack in the Vorax armor had appeared. And for the humans, that was enough to keep pushing. The quiet after the battle was almost unnatural, the kind of silence that pressed down on the chest, a weight that couldn't be shaken. The battlefield was still. The distant clatter of debris and the occasional whine of an engine were the only remnants of the chaos. Frank stood amidst it, his back stiff, his face smeared with dirt and blood. His eyes scanned the landscape for destroyed structures, scattered debris, and a few remaining pockets of smoke. The war had cost them dearly, but it had been worth it. The Vorax were no longer a threat. For now. "We did it," Lisa said softly, standing beside him. Her voice was quiet, but there was a depth of meaning behind it. She had been with him every step of the way, through the chaos and the uncertainty. Together, they had faced an enemy that no one had believed could be beaten. "We did," Frank agreed. He turned to look at her, his expression tired but resolute. But at what cost? The question hung in the air, unspoken but understood. The battle had been won, but victory came with a heavy price. Soldiers had fallen, sacrifices had been made, and the scars of war were not easily erased. The laser plasma displays in the command center flickered as Admiral Curvex's voice echoed through the room, a rare hint of emotion in his tone. "The Vorax have been pushed back. Their forces are scattered, and the majority of their systems are in disarray. We've reclaimed key territories, and their ability to regroup is minimal." His words were measured, yet there was an undercurrent of something. Relief, perhaps? Or even admiration? "I must admit, I never expected this outcome." Jack stood beside him, his arms crossed as he studied the report. His face was hard, unreadable, but his eyes softened just slightly. It's not just the tactics, it's the adaptability of the human spirit. We didn't fight them like the Coalition did. We fought them like we've always fought. Lisa, her back straight, stepped forward. We didn't win because we were better. We won because we were unpredictable. She glanced at Jack, a quiet understanding passing between them. They had faced this enemy with all the rawness and grit that humanity had to offer, and now the Coalition had no choice but to acknowledge it. We have a new problem. General Tazel's voice broke into the conversation, pulling everyone's attention. The older alien's voice was laced with frustration. The Vorax may be beaten, but their mind still lingers. They're not finished. They'll regroup, adapt, and strike again. We cannot allow their resurgence. Tension flared again. For all their victories, the war was not over. The Coalition was still not entirely convinced of the human approach, but the murmurs from other leaders were growing more positive. Admiral Curvex, in particular, was beginning to listen. The report on the battle at Proxima Station, one of the decisive victories, was finally taking effect. The Vorax's once mighty defense strategies had crumbled under human unpredictability. "What do you propose?" Jack asked. He didn't need to say more. Everyone in the room knew that their next steps would shape the future of the galaxy. General Tazel leaned forward, his yellow eyes narrowing. "We need something more than just unpredictability. We need to finish them. Completely." Lisa shook her head, her tone firm. "No. If we wipe them out completely, we make the same mistake again. We create another enemy. This has to be the end of the cycle. No more destruction." Tazel's response was sharp, dismissive. "And you think mercy will change them?" Jack's gaze hardened as he spoke. "We didn't destroy them. We gave them a chance. And now, they will learn the price of underestimating humanity." A new silence filled the room as the weight of Jack's words settled over everyone. The Coalition was teetering on the edge of something new, something unknown, and Jack, for the first time, felt the full weight of humanity's place in this war. Back on Earth, the celebrations were muted. The news of Earth's full membership in the Galactic Coalition had spread quickly, but the victory over the Vorax was still fresh. The people were not ready to celebrate. Too many had fallen. Too many sacrifices had been made. But there was a quiet pride, a collective sense of having done something no one thought was possible. Jack sat at a table, alone in his quarters, the laser plasma display casting a soft glow across his face. The mission reports were in front of him, but his mind wandered elsewhere. He thought of Frank, who had become a symbol of the human spirit, resilient, adaptable, and always moving forward. And Lisa, who had been by his side, keeping him grounded even when the battle had seemed impossible. The weight of leadership had fallen on them, and they had carried it without flinching. But what did it all mean now? The Coalition would celebrate. They would take their victory and move on. But Jack couldn't forget the faces of the soldiers who had died. He couldn't forget the price of this war. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. The scars of conflict would linger, not just on the galaxy, but on humanity itself. "Do you ever think about what we've done?" Lisa's voice cut through the silence. She stood in the doorway, watching him, her expression unreadable. Jack didn't answer at first. Instead, he stared at the display, watching the fading images of the battle. He could still hear the sounds of it, the chaos, the shots fired, the orders yelled in the heat of combat. "I think about it every day," he said finally, his voice soft. "But sometimes you have to ask yourself, what else could we have done?" She stepped forward, resting a hand on the back of his chair. "The Coalition has learned something from us. Not just how to fight, but how to think." Jack nodded, though it didn't feel like enough. "It's only the beginning. We've taught them to adapt, to evolve, but now they have to understand the cost of war." The laser plasma display flickered once more, signaling the end of their conversation. The future was uncertain. But for the first time, humanity had earned its place, not as a savior, but as a force to be reckoned with. The galaxy had learned a valuable lesson: never underestimate the unpredictability of humanity. And now, the real work began. The future of war had changed, and it was humanity's turn to lead the way. The bright glow of laser plasma displays flickered in the dimly lit room, casting long shadows against the walls of the newly built training facility. The familiar hum of the space around them felt like a soft reminder that things were no longer as they once had been. The walls were lined with advanced combat equipment, both alien and human. The vast open expanse before the trainees was both a battleground and a classroom, and the space was filled with the murmur of eager voices. Recruits from all across the coalition stood at attention, awaiting the start of their first session with their new instructors. The future of warfare, it seemed, was about to change forever. Jack Harmon, his face weathered and worn but no less determined, stood at the front of the room. His eyes scanned the young faces in front of him, species he had never imagined would one day be standing before him as students. Each one was different, yet they all shared a commonality now: the same spark in their eyes that spoke of something beyond mere survival, a desire to learn. Lisa stood to Jack's right, her arms crossed, her posture perfect. Frank Martinez was at her side, his expression serious but filled with quiet pride. The three of them, the human veterans who had been thrust into the heart of a galactic war, now found themselves in a new role: educators. They had seen the raw, brutal reality of the battlefield, and they had survived by thinking differently. Now it was their turn to pass on what they had learned: the power of unpredictability in warfare. "We've won a war, but now we teach a different battle," Jack said, his voice steady and commanding. "The battle of the mind." The recruits were silent, absorbing his words. The air seemed thick with the weight of the responsibility that Jack, Lisa, and Frank carried. This was more than just teaching tactics. It was a way of thinking. It was the understanding that war was not simply about technology or firepower, but about adaptability, being able to change in the face of an enemy that thought it had you figured out. "Unpredictability," Lisa continued, stepping forward to address the group, "is your greatest weapon. A perfect strategy is nothing if your enemy can predict your every move. We've learned that the hard way. Now you must learn how to fight when the odds are stacked against you." Frank spoke next, his voice lower but no less intense. "What you're going to learn here is how to fight when you have no advantage, how to think when there's nothing left but the chaos around you. That's the human way. That's what got us through when no one thought we could." The trainees shifted, some still unsure of what they were being asked to embrace. The tension in the room was palpable. These were soldiers from species far older and more advanced than humanity, yet now they were being taught lessons by a race they once considered primitive. It was a role reversal that none of them had ever imagined. Jack's gaze never left the group, his eyes narrowing as he continued. "We're going to teach you how to fight not just with your weapons, but with your mind. You will learn to adapt, deceive, and overwhelm your enemy with sheer unpredictability. We've done it before. Now, it's your turn." The recruits exchanged looks. For many of them, this was a new frontier. They had fought with their superior technology, their advanced strategies, and their highly organized formations. But humanity had shown them a new truth: that unpredictability could be the difference between life and death, between victory and annihilation. "We're not here to teach you how to use weapons," Frank said, his tone firm. "You've already got that covered. We're here to teach you how to win when everything goes wrong, because it will go wrong. You can't rely on the same methods, the same strategies, every single time." Lisa moved across the room, pausing in front of a young alien recruit. "You see, it's not just about the tactics. It's about questioning everything you think you know. It's about not being afraid to change mid-fight. We'll show you how to set traps, confuse your enemy, and keep them guessing. That's how we won. We were unpredictable, and we never stopped changing the game." The room grew heavier as the weight of their words settled in. Some recruits looked apprehensive, others eager. But the truth of it all remained: humanity had succeeded not because of superior technology or resources, but because they were willing to embrace chaos in a way that the coalition never had. The class began, and Jack took his place in front of a laser plasma display, pulling up tactical maps and battle simulations. He pointed to an area on the screen. "This is the area we need to secure. The plan is simple. Hit fast, hit hard, and disappear before the enemy can respond. The moment they think they know where you are, you change position. You become unpredictable." Frank spoke next, offering a series of guerrilla tactics to be applied to the training simulations. "You're not soldiers in a neat, orderly line anymore. You're ghosts. You hit them where they don't expect it, move quickly, strike with force, but always leave your enemy questioning how you got there." Lisa's turn came. "But you must also know when to retreat. Sometimes, the best move is not to fight, but to disappear, to create doubt. Let them chase shadows. Let them burn themselves out." As the day wore on, the recruits moved through the simulations, each one pushed to their limits, forced to think outside the box. The results were immediate. For every traditional move the recruits made, Jack and Lisa had them respond with something unexpected, something that made the alien forces flinch in confusion. Hours passed, and as the day ended, Jack stood outside the training room, looking over the recruits as they filtered out, exhausted but oddly satisfied. Lisa and Frank joined him, standing in silence as they watched the new generation of warriors. "Do you think they'll get it?" Lisa asked quietly. Jack shrugged, his gaze still fixed on the trainees. "It's not about getting it right away. It's about learning to adapt. One day they'll understand what we've been teaching them, and when that day comes, they'll be ready for anything." Frank spoke, his voice a low rumble. "We've changed things. Maybe not all of them, but enough. This will be their legacy now." They stood in silence for a moment, reflecting on how far they had come. They had fought not just to win a war, but to change the way war was fought. They had forced a galaxy of species to confront their own limitations. And as the first generation of alien soldiers left the training halls, they carried with them the legacy of humanity. The unpredictable, chaotic, and brilliant legacy that had proven time and time again that when everything else failed, humanity's greatest weapon was their ability to adapt. Jack turned to Lisa and Frank, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "This is just the beginning. They'll teach the next generation. And then, we'll see just how far it goes." The future was no longer uncertain. Humanity had shown the galaxy how to fight, how to survive, how to change.